This is an interesting essay that appeared in New York Times a few years ago, actually, but I'm recording it now several years later because it's still relevant. Plus, it relates to the other points I keep harping about. That when you do something for climate change, in your mind you want to be a good citizen, so you want to eat maybe less meat, drive less, fly less, do lots of things less. But then there is the idea that I keep saying just being a vegetarian doesn't help unless you also keep track of other carbon footprints and so on. So there is some contributions we all can make by tracking your carbon footprint and trying to keep it at a reasonable level, somewhere between 5 to 10 tons per year, let's say, which requires some planning in terms of offsetting long flights, because you don't want to skip long flights. I like seeing places, meeting people, and so on. But what is the story behind carbon footprinting? This essay raises some good historical points about how oil companies are playing this game on multiple levels. Worrying about your carbon footprint is exactly what big oil wants you to do. Why? We'll see that. Big oil is also pushing carbon capture as a dream solution, because then you can keep on consuming fossil fuels because we will just take it out of the air, right? So these are, very motivated businesses that do not want you to stop using fossil fuel. They also keep saying we will do hydrogen and we'll do lots of other things, bioenergy, etc. Coming back to the essay itself, everybody is going carbon neutral these days, from big boys, Amazon, Microsoft, Unilever, Starbucks, JetBlue, to your favorite outdoor brand, even ski resorts, probably your neighborhood coffee roaster too. So everybody wants to claim sustainability and carbon neutral, net zero, etc. And I have podcasts arguing, based on the report, how these big boys actually are not very transparent in terms of what exactly they are doing, and credibility is often very low. What's not to like? Everybody wants to be carbon neutral. Great. Becoming carbon neutral means cutting greenhouse gas emissions as much as you can, then offsetting what you can't avoid with measures like tree planting. Seems admirable, but carbon offsets have lots of issues. First of all, tracking it is not always possible. When I fly, United or every airline will ask whether I want to pay a fee to offset my carbon footprint, and you feel guilty and say you pay, but you have no way of finding out exactly whether that happened, because in addition to what would naturally happen in a forest, let's say, somebody has to plant an additional tree to ensure more carbon was captured to offset my emissions. This is not easy. So in that sense, this is admirable seemingly, but not exactly. Carbon neutrality doesn't achieve any sort of systemic change. A coal-powered business could be entirely carbon neutral as long as it stops some landfill gas in Malaysia from entering the atmosphere equal to the emissions it's still releasing. So coal plant is releasing emissions, but taking it out somewhere. American fossil fuel dependence would remain intact, and planet warming emissions would continue to rise. The only way to fix that is through politics, policymakers, and legislation. But depressingly, most businesses don't want to play in that arena. They, if anything, lobby to protect their continued use of fossil fuels, profit making, etc., let's say. And for individuals, if we are in a carbon trap, the idea of a carbon trap is proposed, and I've discussed it elsewhere as well on the channel, then the system has to be decarbonized, and our excessive attention on personal carbon footprints may actually distract us from following on what the system should be doing and whether it's doing it or not. Instead, what the oil companies are doing exactly what the fossil fuel industry wants, the businesses staying in their lane, accepting some blame for a global problem, and maintaining the dominance of fossil fuels. They are well-intentioned, sure, but also clueless or even complicit with the oil companies' agenda. Imagine if businesses put as much effort into climate lobbying as climate neutrality. Corporations wield tremendous influence over the political system, but on climate, most have decided to sit this one out. Notably, the five biggest tech corporations, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, Alphabet, and Amazon, spend only 4% of their lobbying dollars on climate, according to Influence Map, but remember this is from 2021. As a result, they avoid the chance to put in place systemic solutions in favor of carbon neutral navel gazing, which is just doing nothing but staring into your own navel. Large corporations will protest, saying that they are lobbying on climate, but they're typically working both sides of the aisles, and their political contributions are mostly going in the wrong direction. Bloomberg Green examined political donations by more than 100 major American corporations and found last year that they were throwing their support behind lawmakers who routinely stall climate legislation. So this is also playing out in a funny way that the Yale 360 Pew Charitable Foundation surveys keep saying people do support climate action based on how it's worded, and they want their politicians to take action, but will they pay taxes? That's one question. The other is, if people really want it, why are politicians happy to avoid it and take money from businesses that also don't want it or want it to be slowed down and so on? So it's complicated. Climate never ascends to the level of mission critical issues like trade policy and taxation. Sure, there are exceptions. Salesforce recently said it would intensify its focus on climate lobbying, and Patagonia has always been aggressive along with Ben & Jerry's. But there are anomalies led or inspired by charismatic founders, and if the management changes, then the system in those companies may change as well. How did it come to this? The story of how what's considered the best approach to corporate sustainability became complicity with the very industry responsible for climate change starts with the famous Crying Indian commercial in the 1970s. Okay, the ad in which an actor portraying a Native American is devastated by the sight of rampant pollution created several generations of dutiful litter pickers guilty, but it wasn't so benign. It was in fact masterly propaganda from the beverage and container industries designed to replace responsibility for the trash problem on the American consumers. Designed to place responsibility for the trash problem on American consumers and not manufacturers. The approach was so good that the fossil fuel industry adopted the very same strategy. Well, consumers do have to pick up and not throw trash everywhere, but on the other hand, manufacturers have to produce biodegradable packaging and so on, and not take the cheap option that is not good for the environment. So systemic solutions are about protecting the consumer from having to worry about every little choice. Willpower is limited resource, so if you want to worry about something like food miles and keep track of everything, where it's coming from and so on, imagine a mother that's just trying to pack lunch for the kid in the morning. How long can she keep worrying about what goes into the lunchbox? It's hard to keep track, right? In 2004, British Petroleum hired the public relations firm Ogilvy and Mather to improve its image in port by conveying the message that consumers of oil and natural gas bear the responsibility for their greenhouse gas emissions, not the producers of the oil and gas they use. Okay? So that consumers of oil and natural gas bear the responsibility for their greenhouse gas emissions, not the producers of the oil and gas they use. The result was BP's ingenious carbon footprint calculator, which allows individuals to calculate the carbon emissions that result from their activities. It's about helping you to go carbon neutral, reducing and offsetting your carbon footprint, BP says on its Target Neutral website. Nor was BP alone among the big oil companies communicating this message. A study by Naomi Oreskes and Jeffrey Supran at Harvard, published in May in the journal One Earth, found that since 1972, ExxonMobil has consistently used rhetoric aimed at shifting responsibility for climate change away from itself and on to the consumers. Again, that paper is from 2021, but Naomi Oreskes, of course, writes many books. This Changes Everything became quite popular in terms of how capitalism and climate change are all one big mess. Yes, those consumers want the hot showers, warm homes, and cold beer that coal, oil, and gas provide, but they did not insist on the burning of fossil fuels for those amenities. Now there are other ways to produce energy, and responsibility to tap those renewable sources lies with the world's energy companies and not the consumer. Today, almost 20 years after BP's carbon calculator went live, reducing a firm's carbon footprint is still the gold standard of corporate climate action. The phrase is firmly lodged in the environmental lexicon now, carbon footprint. The idea of offsetting one's carbon footprint by cutting or eliminating greenhouse gas emissions in one place to make up for emissions elsewhere has grown to an enormous industry. Businesses often do this by buying carbon credits to offset emissions they can't or won't reduce. The consulting firm McKinsey estimates that the market for carbon credits could be worth upward of $50 billion in 2030. So you can look up the number right now, but many are not tracked very well. Many of these offsets underwrite worthwhile projects, though, protecting virgin expanses in some of the world's last great forests, as in the Amazon, or the deployment of solar power. But according to an analysis by the private sector task force on scaling voluntary carbon markets, fewer than 5% of the offsets in 2020 removed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We haven't been doing things at scale. You would need to be gigaton scale to do this. These are at best in million tons, which of course is what we desperately need to be doing in terms of offsetting. A giant systemic problem like climate needs to be addressed like other huge environmental challenges the world has successfully taken on, reducing ozone depleting chemicals worldwide, for example, and sharply cutting back on smog and water pollution in the United States. Imagine if, in response to the expansion of the ozone hole, businesses and governments had said, "We'll just hope the businesses do the right thing." Instead, the international policymakers created a Montreal Protocol which set standards that phased out ozone-destroying chlorofluorocarbon use worldwide. There, I got it. But one has to be careful here because ozone hole was created by the use of CFCs, as was reported in the 1970s. Paul Crutzen and others won the Nobel Prize for their work. But I think DuPont or Dow came along and said, here is a miracle material that can replace CFCs, which was HFCs. Now they are strong greenhouse gases. They have to be replaced as well pretty soon, which is the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. But these are simple problems compared to climate change. Climate change is a much, much more complicated problem than the ozone hole problem. So we cannot directly compare what we did for the ozone hole to what we can do, or what the system needs to do for climate change. Right? Energy use is one. You want to reduce the carbon intensity of the energy, but also energy intensity of the GDP, and get us out of the carbon trap, in the sense everything we do is carbon. Every little thing you buy and use is carbon-based, so we have to be careful. We need more of that approach, citizens, businesses, and governments working together to address this crisis, which is true, but solutions are complicated, and it's a wicked problem, as I have reported elsewhere. It might result in policy solutions like government regulation, effective carbon taxes, national standards for renewable energy and electrification, the elimination of legacy subsidies for the fossil fuel industry, strict auto emission standards and new national building codes, and also just avoid investing and locking in to fossil fuel based infrastructure, like manufacturing fossil fuel based engines, vehicles, etc. All of these approaches threaten fossil fuel business model, and not coincidentally would help to slow the warming of the planet as well, even though it's not good for the energy industry, the fossil fuel energy industry. What do fossil fuel companies prefer? They like consumers and corporations to do anything and everything as long as they stay out of the company's way and avoid doing anything that could actually make a difference. Tragically, the overwhelming majority of American businesses are on a path of complicity. The climate strategy avoids conflict and generates great public relations. Unfortunately, it also allows fossil fuel interests to monetize their remaining assets unhindered, ensuring catastrophe for all. How carbon neutral is that? Well, it's poignant, but also one should remember that oil companies which invest massive amounts in finding new sources are not having much luck, and they are moving towards hydrogen. Saudi Arabia wants to do hydrogen and may be lucky enough to find natural hydrogen or white hydrogen. It may have a lot of solar and wind, which it may try to sell. So things will evolve, they are evolving, but in the meantime, fossil fuel companies are not showing any intention of lobbying for climate action from the government side, and businesses will only work at the compliance level and not really spiritually changing their mind about going carbon neutral themselves as a way to be a good citizen and not just. It's complicated, of course, because you and I may have, you may be young listening to this, but your parents may have retirement accounts, and the retirement account is a group investment, and it may be investing happily in fossil fuel companies which are making money. So we are all part of it, and it's not just that it's oil companies versus us. Carbon trap means we are all in this together, so we all have to push for systemic changes. The point still is that doing individual carbon footprinting may divert our attention from the bigger problems, because one action bias, you buy a hybrid and you think you have contributed your best to climate change, or not paying attention to everything else you do, and just being aware and pushing your politicians and the government and everywhere for climate policies that push us towards decarbonizing, right? So that's the sermon for today. It's a nice article. I wanted to include it here, even though I read it in 2021 and had set it aside. There are others who argue that focusing on individual actions is just not going to help. I don't believe in that we should and can do a lot, but just be careful about not offsetting what you do here with something else there, like riding a bicycle but eating burgers every day. So it's complicated, but we have to pay attention nonetheless. Okay, see you in the next podcast.